We've got a lot going on here. I want to start with this, though, Danny. Complicating matters is that Abrego Garcia, the mistaken, and I use that word lightly, I put that in quotes because aren't they all these deportations that have happened to this El Salvador prison legally questionable? But in terms of this mistaken deportation, it's not clear how the U.S. Supreme Court would have jurisdiction. Points made by Secretary of State Marco Rubio yesterday. Take a look.
I don't understand what the confusion is. This individual is a citizen of El Salvador. He was illegally in the United States and was returned to his country. That's where you deport people, back to their country of origin, except for Venezuela that wasn't refusing to take people back, or places like that. I can tell you this, Mr. President, no, the foreign policy of the United States is conducted by the President of the United States, not by a court. And no court in the United States has a right to conduct the foreign policy of the United States. It's that simple. End of story.
So, you know, there's been a lot of criticism of the Supreme Court, the way they phrased their decision, and you predicted how everything would go down on Friday. And at the same time, this is difficult, isn't it? And the Supreme Court may have done all they can do. You have an El Salvador resident return to El Salvador, and a judge in Washington, D.C., telling El Salvador to send back one of their own residents to the United States. It's more complicated than it looks, which Marco Rubio is pointing out that, look, what's the deal, guys? Politically, we'll get to the politics of this. This is a winner for the Trump administration, in my opinion. And then on top of it, distracting from all the other questionable deportations. Can you comment on the Secretary of State's explanation of this?
The Secretary of State's explanation, like much of the Trump administration's position, all was predictable. And as you mentioned, I was here on Friday and I read the Supreme Court's order, and anyone reading it could have seen this coming. I would love to be some talented fortune teller. Right. I'm not. If you just read the language of the Supreme Court order, that order said, and I'm quoting from it, that any directive the lower court came up with would have to give due regard to the executive branch's exclusive authorities over foreign affairs. The Supreme Court essentially said to the lower court, go back, tell the administration how to facilitate this return if you dare, or if you can find a way to make the administration do it. The administration knew that from reading the language. They could just sit back and say, hey, we've done everything we can. And their position is, we view the word facilitate as removing all domestic obstacles. So if he happened to make it back here to Cleveland, we would have no problem taking him. But now that he's in El Salvador, there is nothing we can do because, as Rubio said, this is infringing on the area, the exclusive executive area of foreign affairs. And just one little footnote here, too. There's been much reporting, and correctly, that the government admitted this was a mistake. But keep in mind, that will not be the administration's party line, because the attorney for the government who said that, the administration has essentially disavowed this person. They put him on administrative leave. They for not zealously representing the government. Pam Bondi's words, not mine. So while it's true the government admitted that Garcia was removed improperly due to an administrative error, don't expect the administration to carry on with that position. They've already distanced themselves from it. They don't believe they're disregarding a court order. They believe they're acting consistent with it.
Absolutely. And Dave Arenberg, you had the president with the president of El Salvador right there going, nope, I'm not going to send him back. And the president's job, you tell me, in terms of trying to follow the U.S. Supreme Court ruling, President Trump's job is done, because he sat right next to the president of El Salvador who said, I'm not sending him back. Therefore, any attempt to facilitate his return ends with the president of El Salvador, does it not?
Well, that's what they're trying to say, Mika, but it's obvious that President Bukele would have this individual on the next flight home in first class if Trump demanded it. Judge Zinnes was right, the district court judge. You don't rid yourself of constitutional responsibilities of due process by outsourcing your detention. And we're actually paying El Salvador to lock these folks up. And Kristi Noem, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, said this is a tool in our toolkit. So if it is one of our tools, we can fix the problem. I don't think we're in a constitutional crisis yet, though, Mika, because the administration is playing games with the interpretation of federal court rules, but they're not outwardly defying federal judges. No one's been held in contempt yet. Trump has said he will respect the decisions of the Supreme Court. So instead of refusing to comply, what they're doing is trying to twist the Supreme Court's words to make it a victory for themselves when it really wasn't. But as Danny correctly said, the Supreme Court is partly to blame here. They could have ordered Abrego Garcia's return, but they did not. They softened Judge Zinnis's language. They took out the word effectuate, and they said, let's facilitate the return. And this is because Chief Justice Roberts wanted unanimity. He wanted Clarence Thomas and Alito and the other conservatives to join with the progressive in a 9-0 ruling. He got it. But in so doing, he has made things worse.
And the word facilitate is so important there, as both of our legal experts have pointed out. But it is stunning, Chris, when you see in the Oval Office, you've got the Attorney General Pam Bondi using that word facilitate in front of the president of El Salvador, saying it's up to them if they want to send them back. She even says, we'll send a plane and facilitate it. And then you've got the president of El Salvador saying, what am I going to do? Smuggle him back into the United States? They're talking past each other, and it seems purposeful. Mika alluded to the political realities here. What are they, as you see them?
Why didn't the press who were present ask the president, why don't you ask them to send them back?
They asked the questions about the way they were talking about
asking the president of El Salvador
Certainly.
to send him back, and then there wouldn't be no question about smuggling him back into the country. That whole language was, as you said, we're talking past each other. You know, this whole thing, Mika, I think this whole discussion of the border has changed so dramatically from the election. The New York Times reported the two reasons Trump won. The two reasons was he talked about inflation and he talked about the border. We haven't talked about the border being closed since he got in office. The country is reasonable. They want the border closed. They want to stop people coming into the country illegally. They want people coming in with permission from the United States government to come in the country. But also, they seem to want to get people who've actually broke the laws in this country. Two laws. Break the law coming in and then break the law here in terms of criminality here. In this case, the issue has come down to something that's right on the border. People don't want somebody punished who isn't committing a crime, who's not in a gang, who's not a dangerous gang. And so I think the country's still at a reasonable position. Close the border, go after criminals, but don't go after people who are innocent.
I hope you're right, Chris. I'm not sure. Molly.
Well, we're not complaining about the border. Nobody's complaining. I haven't heard a pipsqueak from anybody in any of the organized groups to say we shouldn't have closed the border. The public wanted the border closed.
I just want to point out this Quinnipiac poll that was released last night, which shows that now the majority of Americans now disapprove of Trump on the deportations, 53 to 42.
Okay.
So I think that is a big deal.
Okay.
Well, because they think he's administratively wrong, because they think they're taking people who are not criminals out of the country.
I've just been so disappointed.
But this is a real case of squandering, right? There was some agreement with Trump, but not for this. And I think that's a really important point here, right? Yeah. That there was, and we saw this even in the polls leading up to the election, right? They were they were okay with some of this, but not this kind of radical behavior, and that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, I
agree.
I hope that Americans see the value in caring about this, and these videos that they made of these hundreds of men who were chained and sent out of this country and put into a notorious mega prison in El Salvador. I hope that they can connect with it. I just, we will see, and maybe those numbers bear that out. From politics back to the law. Danny, where does this go next?
I think this road could be leading to contempt. And what I also think, and I don't know that any federal judge will be candid about it, but I think there are a lot of federal judges who don't want this to go down the road of contempt, because that raises a really thorny issue of who do you hold in contempt in the chain of command? Because every human being in the administration's chain of command can say, I was ordered to do it, except one person. And that person is at the top of the chain of command. So if you're a judge, whether it's a Supreme Court or a district court judge, and you find that someone has acted in contempt in this administration and their reading of the order is wrong, who do you punish? That may be the next tricky constitutional issue.